Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 118 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Lisa Valentine Clark for this episode. Lisa is a widowed mom of 5, and she lost her husband about 2 years ago to ALS. I know you'll really look forward to hearing our discussion and her reflections, especially as she is approaching right around now the 2-year anniversary of her husband's death. Before we jump into my discussion with Lisa, though, I wanted to let you guys know some news from here. First of all, about the anthology. It's called Widowed Parents Unite, and I have been working on pulling together tips, short, very accessible tips from fellow widowed parents like yourself to newly widowed parents, those coming after us on the journey. I would like to share with you guys that the book will be out November 1st, and the reason that I am very excited about this timing is that November is Children's Grief Awareness Month. So November 1st will be the perfect time for that to come out. And the reason why this is really important, I think, widowed parents, it's an interesting situation. We are widowed, and we are parents, and so we are parenting grieving kids, and we are also still parenting kids with regular kid issues too. And when it comes to thinking about children's grief, there are some terrific grief centers and grief programs in many communities, and that work with kids and teens of all ages. I also think it's very important that we support the surviving parents, the widowed parents. That's you guys who are listening. That's my audience. I think that the surviving parents are the people who are day in and day out with their kids who are grieving. So I think one way of supporting those kids, a very important way, is to support the surviving parents. So it's a very long way of saying that I am very excited that this next book, Widowed Parents Unite, will be out on November 1st. So keep an eye out for that. Much more to come as we move forward. And also an exciting update regarding Future Widow. Well, 2 updates actually, and that's my memoir. The large print edition has just come out. It's available now. So if you know any libraries who may be looking for a large print edition, be sure and let them know. And if you yourself or somebody you know has been thinking about reading it but was waiting for that large print edition to come out, it is available now. And large print editions, by the way, are helpful not only for people with low vision, but also dyslexia and other kinds of accessibility considerations are taken into account with the type font and all the details of the large print book. So again, it's not just for low vision, but lots of people may find that a preferred option. And one more thing, I am working on the audiobook version of Future Widow, so stay tuned for that. All right, that's all the news from here. Let's get on with the show. Hey there, you may have heard about my book, Future Widow. What's it about, you ask? Well, first, my young husband started feeling dizzy and stopped making sense. And the next thing I knew, I was a widowed parent, desperately wanting to know how exactly do you raise grieving kids anyway? And that's what Future Widow is about. In the book, which has endorsements from many prominent children's grief experts, my family's story is told as a memoir, but I've explicitly worked in themes about parenting grieving kids to make it broadly applicable, including to those who are becoming widowed parents today. Readers have said it's captivating, that they couldn't put it down, that it's an honest and hopeful read, and that it's a must-read for anyone facing loss. Find Future Widow at futurewidowbook.com. That's futurewidowbook.com. And thank you. My guest today is Lisa Valentine Clark. Lisa is a widowed parent, and she's the host of The Lisa Show on BYU Radio. She's joining us today from Provo, Utah. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, it's great to talk to you. And you're a fellow widowed parent. I'm a widowed parent. My listeners are mostly widowed parents with kids ranging from baby through college age. And I know I hear from them a lot that it always helps to hear from another widowed parent, somebody on this journey, someone with kids, someone who's living this life. Even if it's just a matter of feeling a little less alone, somebody else sharing their story. Yeah. And then of course, all the tips, reflections, all that good stuff. So That's a very long way of saying thank you for coming today and
Yeah.
and speaking with my listeners. Okay, well, why don't we just dive right in here? And if you don't mind, I'd love if you'd back up and just tell us a little bit about your life back when everything was normal, before your husband died, and actually before he got sick.
Mhm.
Tell us what was kind of normal life like back then.
Well, it was crazy. We had 5 kids all at home. And just the way that my late husband and I both are, we're just really interested in a lot of things. It's a kind of, I mean, obviously like a lot of kids. And at the time before of his diagnosis, he had just finished a PhD and had gotten a master's degree before that. All while working full time and directing plays in the evening because he's a theater director. So his master's was in staging Shakespeare. We had lived in England for a little bit. He'd gotten his PhD in theater and education leadership. And so I helped with that, obviously, but then I had my own stuff going on too. And my kids were at a certain age. At the time of his diagnosis, they were 8 to 18. So about every couple of years. So lots of different developmental stages. And I was getting back into freelance. I'm a voiceover artist at that time and actress. And so I had been doing, hosting kind of a TV show that traveled around a little bit and doing voiceover work and some independent movies with some of my friends. And so like life was busy and intense, but fun. We had found a really great rhythm with each other of back to forth on each other's projects and things like that. Funny, great kids, and really kind of almost like a movie, like everything's great. I mean, it's intense and busy, but it'll settle down soon.
Yeah, right.
Life will kind of settle into you've got tenure. That's great. But now, we'll keep going to full professorship. I will, start doing more projects. You'll stay home a little bit more, all that kind of balance and negotiation of just a really busy, fun family life is what I would characterize it as.
Yeah. Okay. All right, cool. And so, but of course, spoiler alert, right? That's not the way it went. You mentioned that your husband was diagnosed. So tell us what happened.
So he had a little bit of a drag in his leg, right? Like he came home one day and he said, it's really funny. I went to go my leg has been bugging me ever since the summer. And I was like, nah, shake it off, drink a glass of water, have an ibuprofen, you're fine. Exactly, I got 5 kids, you're fine. And he said, it took my brain a half a second because a car was coming to go, no, run across the street to make it in time. And he's like, and it was just enough of a delay that I noticed it. And I thought, well, that's really, really weird. Yeah. And he had a, back surgery in his 20s, which was kind of a genetic thing. And we thought, oh, you need a tune-up. That's probably what it is.
Something's acting up. Right.
Yeah. And we didn't take it very seriously. And so we made some, appointments for, a scan and it was clean. And then got another scan kind of higher up in his neck and it was clean. And then everybody got a little bit worried. They said, now, what are your symptoms? And it took about 3 to 4 months, which is a horrible time to live. Because of course we didn't tell anybody and we were crossing things off the list until the end of March of 2016, he was officially and reluctantly diagnosed with ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. And the average life expectancy of someone living with ALS is 2 to 5 years. Okay. And it was just this worst case scenario of this otherwise very healthy. It was a real shock to everyone. And, and so that's, there's obviously a lot of details in that, but following that, we made him as comfortable as possible. We went through lots of different phases of thinking, oh, maybe they'll come up with a cure or a treatment, to, acceptance, to caregiving, to adapting our house and our lifestyle, and everything changed. All of our relationships, our jobs, our interaction, everything changed, in March of 2016. And he lived with ALS for 4.5 years, and then unfortunately passed away on June 5th of 2020 at the height of the pandemic. And we weren't able to have a traditional funeral, anything like that.
That was in the early months of the pandemic when things were really shut down.
Yeah. So for the final several months of his life because of that fear. And because of, by that time in 4.5 years, he had gone to just totally normal, hyper, always playing with a little something while he was directing, and just kind of fidgety kind of guy, to not being able to move or speak at all. And kind of like the Stephen Hawking thing. So it was a lot of change in 4.5 years. He had always had the best sense of humor, and just kept it through his whole, life, which was a great gift to us. The last several months of his life, we weren't able to have our aides come in, our CNAs and our therapists and our doctors, even our hospice nurse,
because of the pandemic,
come in or touch him or do anything. So it was really just me taking care of him when, he couldn't move or speak. And it was just a really, really tender time. And, and so now, since then, as many of your listeners know, trying to, live beyond that after he passed in a really horrible, but also beautiful way, is something that, I carry with me all the time. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for telling us about that. And so I think you said your kids, when he was diagnosed, were how old?
Our youngest was 8 and our oldest was 18, and we have 5 kids. So every couple of years,
5 kids. Okay. And then when he died,
a lot of development. Then when he died, our youngest was 12 and a half, and our oldest was 22.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Right. So from that middle school puberty, like transition point on the young end, up through that college on the verge of becoming a young adult.
Yeah. And launching and just wanting to be an adult. And especially like my first 2 oldest were just trying to launch, but staying home because they were worried with their dad. And I had such and my husband had such conflicting feelings of like, we don't want this to stop their life and their momentum and being like excited about life and being able to launch. And yet I was so desperate for their help
especially
for their dad.
Yeah. As you mentioned it's hard enough when you do have hospice nurses and in-home physical therapists and friends who can come over and help with various things. It's hard enough. And then when you layer on those extra challenges of those early
and then just throw in a global pandemic just for fun.
Right.
It's fun.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay.
It was and in fact, I remember saying to my oldest son, his name's Miles, like, this isn't what I wanted for you. I don't want you to worry about changing your life and your school schedule and your work schedule to take care of, like, your dad and I will figure out. We're the parents. You're the kid. Like, live your life. This is what we want for you. And he just looked at me. He's like, this is my dad. Like,
yeah.
And then when the pandemic hit, I looked at him and I said, okay, I'll take 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. You take 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. We'll tag team, take care of him. Because I still was working full time so that my kids had health insurance.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of stuff. And that's what we did. And it ended up, it worked. And I don't know how it worked. And I remember the week that he was dying, and you kind of knew like it was time because of the breathing patterns, and he didn't want to trach. And most people with ALS don't, because there's no hope of getting better. My son started looking for apartments, and I was like, your dad's dying and you're looking it up, like, what's happening? And he said, I will be here as long as you need, as long as dad needs, as long as the kids need. I just want dad to know that I'm going to be okay. I want him to be proud of me, of like, he's going to live on. And I was so touched by that. And it, that's just what I think, especially as widowed parents, we want our kids to be okay. And we need to give them like that kind of opportunity too. And I was so reluctant to like, don't, just pretend like everything's the same when he taught me that was such an important part of parenting, of letting them be able to like sort of express it how they want to. So that was very sweet. Yeah.
Well, so what were some of those early months then as a widowed parent like? I mean, did things change right away? What were some of the biggest challenges?
I think, when you have someone with a terminal disease, you know how it's going to end, but I don't care who you are and how prepared you are. You're not prepared for how you're going to feel when your
Mm-hmm.
person is gone.
Mm-hmm.
For me, this was, my husband, the father of my children, my best friend, my favorite person, the funniest person like so many different, like I lost all of it.
Yeah.
And it really, and because I had been a caregiver, I physically didn't know what to do. I mean, he would drool and we would laugh about it. And, he couldn't even scratch his nose. I mean, he couldn't do anything. He would slump down. He'd be like, type out with his eyes, shake me up. And I would just have to shake him up in his wheelchair.
Huh.
And when he died, those first few months, I was like, what do people do? Because I was so busy all the time over, working full time and then coming home and waking him up and dressing him, and which took an hour and a half, and then taking care of him and feeding and the emergency meds and all of this stuff. And I didn't know what to do with my hands. I didn't know what to do with my body. I said, do people just go to work and then they come home? And then it's like I had forgotten because was so focused on taking care of him.
Right.
So it made the grief feel like I had all the time in the world now to grieve, which was the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
So it was really disassociating for me. Life kind of kept the same. The kids sort of looked to me and I just went through the motions, right? I just thought to myself, I just want to stay in bed and cry all day. This is awful. I'll probably always feel like this. How would I not? Because this will never be solved. This is not, I can't outwork this. I can't talk myself out of it. I can't solve it. I can't work harder out of it,
You can't ignore it and hope it goes away.
Yeah. And I read all the grief books and I have a strong spiritual practice. And I was like, no, this is just, this is what they mean when you just have to feel it. So I tried really hard not to numb it, which was, with what, all the different things that people numb their grief with. And I thought, I got to do this. I don't want this to be so intense. So I want to experience it and go through it without trying to avoid it or pushing it down, because that'll just prolong it. And I just spent a lot of time just trusting the people who were closest to me. I have a sister who sort of guided me through, where I literally said to her, my brain doesn't work. I can't even remember my phone number when we went to the mortuary, stupid stuff. I'm a cliche with this widow fog. So I'm outsourcing my life decisions to you for the time being, which a little sister would love, I was I know
this is your younger sister.
My younger sister. She's like, I'm ready, and she just kind of made sure that the house ran and that everybody was okay. And at that time, we were all isolating, and we just invited her family into our bubble. I just said, I can't be by myself with my kids while we're mourning this loss.
Right.
But I want to be a responsible citizen at the same time.
Right.
Let's combine bubbles. And so that's really what got me through those first little months. And then just trying to tell myself, just don't make any, you don't have to do anything. Wake up. You want to cry? Great. You want to watch a movie? Great. You want to hug your kids? Great. Just try not to evaluate it or do it perfectly. Just be for a couple of months. And then after a couple of months, I was like, I got to get, this is not helping. I got to get back to work. I got to start running. I got to start, I have this blue journal and I call it my sad journal. I haven't been able to go back and reread it, but I just wrote everything down. And, and I'm sure that those who are listening can identify with, you just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You just know you have to get through it.
Right. I'm losing my train of thought here. Well, one of the things I'm thinking about, so you're talking about the first few months here. I'm thinking about this first year, second year thing, right? And I hear a lot of people say the first year is the hardest and then it gets easier. And I hear a lot of people say, oh, you think the first year is bad, just wait till you hit the second year, right? And so there seems to be different experiences, but I wonder how that was for you. You said you're just approaching, as we were speaking today, you're approaching the 2-year mark.
Yeah, I'm almost there. It's I'm in the second year anniversary of when it really all hit the fan. It was really bad. And I knew we were making a plan for the end. We're circling the drain, right? Where you're having some real heart to hearts with that hospice nurse, and you're running out of time. And I would hear that in the first year, that some people on message boards or had these like support groups online or whatever, that I would just be curious and look in, and they would say the second year's hardest. And I thought, why would you say that? That sounds so horrible. And
yeah.
And yet I get it now that I've finished my second year. And it's because that first year, it's almost like I was white knuckling it, right? Like I got to get through the first Thanksgiving. Okay, we did it. All right, now the first Christmas, and what can I do to make it special and make it special for the kids? And it's that hyper vigilance that comes, I think, especially with caregiving, but also after trauma.
Yeah.
And it's hard to shake, right? Like, and I was retraining my brain, but also like that was years and years of hypervigilance, of me waking up several times in the middle of the night. Is he still breathing? What does he need? And,
4+ years.
For years I lived like that. And then I wasn't. And it was like, my body didn't trust it. My brain didn't trust it. And my brain was lying to me too, because it was like, we don't trust anything. And so it was just a lot of meditative practices and a lot of reading a lot of books about grief and anxiety, and calming and journaling and calming my body so that my brain would believe that like, it's okay. And so I feel like that first year was all of that learning, and everything, like at the 5th of every month, I could just feel it's been 1 month. It's been 2 months. It's been 3 months. And I hated it because even if I didn't want to think about it, it's like I would get a headache that day, or like it was crazy. And then the second year, there's just sort of this, now what? Oh, you got through that first year, but now it's the rest of your life.
Oh, interesting.
And now it just sort of looked, how many, like, what do we have to do now?
Yeah.
And so for me, I wanted it to be exponentially better after the first year. And I knew that wasn't realistic. It's just incrementally. What people say about grief is true, that you never get over it. It's not, I'll love Christopher forever. I'll never get over him.
Right.
But you learn how to hold it better. When you're holding it like this and it's all you can see in front of your face, it's different when you put it comfortably on and you acknowledge it. You are here and we are moving forward and we're making new memories and new plans. Do we wish we could? Yes, we do. We acknowledge that, it was wonderful and we wish that we were still living that, but nobody gets to live in the past. So, and it's just like a mind game. But the second year was harder for me, I think, because I was more blindsided by grief. The first year I planned for it. I knew the big days and markers were coming. The second year, it would just come in ordinary days. And, you would see something and it would remind me of something I hadn't thought about for years. Or I had a panic attack because I was thinking of something really funny, of a joke, and I couldn't remember the last part of it.
Oh.
And for a split second, I was like, Chris, and I just thought, I can't remember the joke. What else have I forgotten? Because here is my partner who holds half my brain, half my memories, who remembers things better than me. And I just thought, how many other stories and memories are gone because I can't go, hey, who was that? Or how did that end? Or how did you finish that story? And I felt the loss of that. And it just triggered this anxiety. And so that was surprising.
Right.
Now, after another year, I feel like it's going to come and it's not going to ruin my whole day, right? It might take my breath away. I might have to stop and deal with it for a minute. I might have to cry. I might have to meditate, whatever it is. And then I can get on to the next, I can acknowledge it and get on to the next thing. It's not going to totally derail me. And this is my whole life now. And now my whole life is awful. That's awful. And then this is good. And this is okay. And you could and life is all of those things.
Well, that got me thinking, I'm wondering what your predictions or expectations are now that you're starting this third year, right? Like,
oh yeah, I'm trying not to have any expectations, and it's really hard for me because I'm a recovering perfectionist. And so I want goals and I want things to achieve and I'm just like, you've learned this lesson.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that a hard-won truth that I had, that when I had zero hope and I was super, super I'll never laugh again. And and intellectually your friends are like, of course you will, but you're like, I don't know. I really don't. Not like before. I did not see this rare terminal disease coming. It came out of nowhere. It was in no plan. There was no hint of it. And it happened and it's done. And my brain wasn't able to predict it or formulate it. So the opposite must be true too. There is a possibility that something wonderful and glorious and funny and exciting and new could happen to me that I've never even thought of before.
Yeah.
And when I didn't have any hope, intellectually that made sense to me, and it snapped me out of it to go, yeah, that has to be true too.
Yeah.
Horrible. Great. Don't see anything happen. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Right. Yeah. Something could come out of left field. No, that makes a lot of sense. This actually reminds me, because I read an article about you and your husband. And one of the things it was talking about was improv and how you guys would do a lot of improv and other maybe comedy things. And there was I'm going to read a little bit from the article. The author of the article says, the yes and skills that she picked up performing with the Garen's comedy troupe as a BYU student have become a lifelong guiding philosophy. Quote, your whole life is going to be doing improv and saying yes and then freaking out later in the privacy of your own home, end quote, Lisa says. Life hands you a mess and you go with it and turn it into something better.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting. And I wonder, so improv, right? And I've actually never done improv, but I've heard about it and I've been curious about it. But it's that yes and thing. Well, I guess first, for people who aren't really too familiar with improv, tell us just a little bit about what the deal is.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, improv is probably what you've seen on Whose Line Is It Anyway on TV, or I used to do a show called The Show Offs where we did improv, and it's just literally going on stage and not knowing, having no lines, having no character, having no idea of story or anything, and just getting a suggestion from the audience and then making a whole story. So I have a theater as improv troupe called the Thrillionaires, and we do long form improv. So we do plays and musicals with original music and everything with a band. And we walk on stage and we do it in different styles. So it might be like Shakespearean or John Hughes B movie or a Western or a film noir or Tennessee Williams or Jane Austen. It could be anything. And we might know the genre, but that's all we know. And we walk onto stage and we get suggestions like, give me a relationship with two people that's not related by blood, or give me an emotion, or give me an animal. I mean, it could be any kind of suggestion. And we just use that in our subconscious just to start a scene, and we start with an action and then add to it. And one thing that I have, it's really how I see life now, because I've done a lot of improv. I did in college and in different businesses and shows and stuff. And I really realized that the first and only really rule of improv is yes and, that you never deny. So for example, if I was like, acting out like I'm sweeping the floor, and I'm just starting with an action, like maybe that's just the suggestion I got, and I'm sweeping, and someone comes in and says, Mom, hurry up, we got to get in the car and go, you can finish sweeping later. If I have all the power in that moment, because I need to say yes and, like I can say, like I am now, she just gave me a suggestion. I'm a mother, I'm sweeping, and then I have been given an offering to go to a car. So it's taken the story along. So I could agree with it and keep the story moving on by saying, just a second, I just need to get the corner. It calms my nerves before surgery. And now I have given her something else. I've said what I want to do is I don't want to go, but I've also acknowledged in the future that we're doing it. So we're just sharing little by little, and that's what makes and creates the story. Now, the worst thing that you can do when you do improv is to say no and. So if I was sweeping and she said, Mom, come on in, you can sweep later. We got to get in the car, or we're going to be late. I could say, I'm not your mom. I'm not sweeping. I'm doing an Olympic event of curling. And what that immediately does is it stops the action. It doesn't add anything. It embarrasses the other person on stage, and you have to start over. It's as if nothing happened, because now she says, okay, like, who are you? Or she has to come up with another offering, like, oh yes, I am crazy and I was wrong, or I didn't see you there, or whatever. She had it's putting it back. It's deflecting, and it's not adding to. So it stops it, and it makes it uncomfortable and creates nothing. And I've done improv with people who love to do that, to negate, and it's not fun. You don't want to play with those people.
Right.
But the people who want to play and create something are the ones that constantly say yes. And they don't just stand there, they add something else to it. So they're like throwing a ball back to you.
Gotcha.
And we always talk about what happens when you get the worst offering. Like if somebody says like, I'm sweeping, I'm a mom, like I'm going to like, what if you said, no, let's not do that. Let's surgery. Let's have me going to the Met Gala instead. Again, that tension doesn't create anything. And I found that in life as well, because I really feel like Chris and I got the worst offering ever. ALS. No, we're directing theater. We're making movies. We're having kids. Right. I want to be, he wants to be a grandpa. Like, no. That's not where we want this story to go. Right. And so your whole body is saying, no. We don't want ALS. This is a horrible offering. And once Christopher did it first before I was able to accept it. Right. Like, because the first year there was a lot of, well, I mean, they might find a cure. I mean, you might have like a really, really slow progressive, like, you could live with this for like some people live for 10 or 15 years. I mean, 5%, but you could be
and then in that time, maybe they find some breakthroughs.
Offering isn't, but after the first year, when it was very apparent that he was going to die of ALS and that there was no outrunning it. And we slowly, and with good therapists, were able to accept it. Then I feel like everything changed. So Christopher I know that I have this and I'm not going to fight it. And I'm not also going to negotiate it. And it's also not the most interesting thing about me. So do I need a wheelchair so that I can conserve my energy so that I can teach during the day and be a professor and then direct plays? Yeah. Yes. And okay, I can't play the piano anymore because my fingers don't work anymore. Am I going to cry about it? Because he used to be kind of like a concert pianist. No, I'm just going to focus on the things I can do. I can still teach. I can still be with my kids. I can still be a good husband. I can still be a theater director. So I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to worry about what I can still do this. And he did that the rest of his diagnosis. And it was a great focus of yes. And, when he died, he had planned an elaborate 25th wedding anniversary surprise for us. It was our 25th wedding anniversary 2 days before he died. He was writing 2 plays. He was in pre-production for another play. He couldn't move or speak, but he was still creating because we found a way through technology and asking for help and great therapists and doctors to maintain what he could. And it was just a refocus. When he couldn't talk, he was like, I shouldn't probably direct and teach anymore. Now I'll write and I'll write my life story and I'll write some plays and I'll still create. I'll still get up and have a purpose for work. And he got up every day, even though he had every excuse just to stay in bed and feel sorry for himself. And it took a lot of people to help him get up, but that was what he wanted to do. And that's how he wanted to live. And that's yes. And then that informs how I want to grieve.
Well,
right?
So that's what I was just thinking. I wonder if it was harder in some ways for you to arrive at that sort of approach.
Yeah, it was. It took me longer because I would still cry. And sometimes I would be, taking care of him and he was so frail and it breaks down the communication between your brain and your neurons and so moving your muscles. So his muscles and it just was deteriorating. It just looked so frail when you were like bathing him and dressing him. And I would just weep. And he'd be like, later when he'd get in his chair, he'd say, why were you crying? And I was like, why am I crying? Oh, let me tell you, this really great guy, the best guy I ever I've known, the father of my children, he's dying of this terminal disease. I don't know if you've heard, it's really, really sad. And he's like, oh, that's old news, And so it did take me a longer time because I was, obviously doing anticipatory grief too, because I just thought this is fun with him. I can take care of him. I'm not tired yet. I can still take care of him, but that wasn't my choice, right? Like the disease just dictated that. And I just wanted that. And so that has helped me. His example of that sort of yes and has helped me in like my darkest moments of grieving when I'm dealing with difficult things with parenting, especially, and you're doing it by yourself and you're like, this isn't fair. And I hate this. And this is the worst, because it is. And solo parenting is just not as fun as parenting with a fun partner. And it just isn't. Or as helpful and supportive. And I feel those big, deep waves of like, what are we doing? This is awful. I do think about Chris saying, you can take your 10 to 15 minutes a day to feel sorry for yourself and to say, this is the worst. And this is the whole, the worst thing ever. But then do something else, like add to it. And okay, this is the worst. And I'm going to help this kid who's having a hard time. And I'm going to go to work and I'm going to pay the taxes. And I'm going to mow the stupid lawn, which was never my job. And now I have to take care of it. And it's driving me nuts.
Oh my gosh. I couldn't agree with you more. That was never my job.
Swear more than having to do the jobs that he had to do.
Yeah. The lawn, the yard, all that stuff. Forget it. Yeah. And it's been raining so much here that I finally, you have to pick and you get a little window, right? And so I went outside and I mowed the whole front and then I mowed half the back and then the battery died. Oh. And I was like, well, I got to charge it up.
Set me in a tizzy.
And by the time it was charged, it was raining again. And
I hate stuff like that.
I know. Here, we're just getting off on a total tangent, but
No, but it has to do with it. It's like, let's not underestimate, like when you take an offering for a yes and you're grieving and you're still raising kids, the lawnmower still runs out of juice. It still rains. Like you still have all this stuff coming. It's not like you're just grieving, in those first few months, people leave you alone. You don't have to go to work. You don't have to cook. You have that time to sort of like, oh, this is it. And then you're 2 years in and you have those days and you're like, but guess what? You got to do it all and roll up your sleeves and get to work. And so I just think, I think that's all related.
Yeah. Well, it makes me wonder too, just what we've been talking about here, if there was any like a turning point for you at all as a widowed parent. Like, I think, you mentioned, in the beginning, it's like, it's always going to be this way, or it's always going to be this hard, or you can't imagine it being different or different things. Right. But was there a point at which you were like, maybe there's starting to be a turning point. I could see that, the future might be different or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I think about 10 months in, so almost a year, about 10 months in, I remember thinking, I'm comfortable now with a new routine that I never thought I would be comfortable with. This is weird. And just being aware of it, like my brain was aware that they're like I could breathe. It's like it took me that long to sort of like not have to be conscious about taking a deep breath and not those shallow sort of trauma breaths, where you're just sort of holding your breath for the next shoe to drop. Are my kids okay? And I looked around and all 5 of my kids had like gone through some major, grief, and I guided them through. And now I was like, everybody's doing okay. Everything's okay. I can take a deep breath. And just kind of that feeling of, this is going to be the rest of your life. And so you can decide what you want to do every day with it. And you can be someone who, quote unquote, never gets over it. And you can be one who carries it always and just carries it stronger and gets on with life. And that's ultimately like what I wanted to do. And I think because my body and my mind was able to calm down, then my spirit was as well. And I feel like I could really be more objective about what like Chris wanted for my life. And then I felt like more encouraged by it instead of haunted by it, instead of like, but I wish you were here. It was like, I will always wish that you were here, but I do want to honor our love, our family, our relationship. And I want my family's story to be how I really feel like it is, which is like a triumph, which is what a great family, what great loving parents and wonderful kids and tight knit. Like that's our family. Our family isn't Christopher died and the family went away. Like,
right.
And I just felt like I got to choose what the rest of the family's story was.
Yeah.
And it was about that time. And that was a big turning point. And I think that I was only able to do that because, I had really great support and I had like let myself feel it. and not had run from it. So
Well, along the lines of support, I'm curious what you've found especially helpful in terms of support. I'm thinking, there's some things that, if people are listening who are not widowed parents, who are wanting to maybe better understand how to support widowed parents. Any suggestions?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So many. I've had some really great examples that and my kids wouldn't be thriving without them for sure. My siblings were amazing. Each one of I'm one of 5, and each one of my siblings sort of played a different role, but really just didn't wait to be asked and just stepped in. I mean, my little sister, Gina, basically made it her full-time job to help us like renovate our house so that it was handicapped accessible, was there while he was dying to make sure the kids were okay. And like that kind of second mom, but was only able to do that because she had that relationship with them for years. My older brother is a physician, and he had been a hospice doctor. He was there to help me say, is this right? Is this okay? Like, what happened? I remember 2 days after he died, I had a total grief breakdown, because I thought if I made my husband get a trach, he would still be lying here in bed next to me. Why didn't I make him get one? Now, we had this conversation 100 times over 4.5 years. We had it written down in a trust with a lawyer. I had talked to him, but you know what your brain does. And so my brother was able to, one gift that he gave me that I don't think anyone else could is he sat down and went through each event. It took about 2 hours. And he said, now remember, first he was having a hard time breathing because these levels, and then we decided this, then we decided to help walk me through it about how this was a good death, that this was exactly what Chris wanted, that we had already asked, and that I kept my promise that he didn't suffer. Like, he led me through that without being condescending, without being flippant, even without being emotional, and walked me through the events for 2 hours, and it calmed me down, and I've never forgotten it. He remembered for me. And I have another brother who is a famous musician, and he very early on was like, I'm not going to be able to be there because we didn't live near each other, but I'm going to be able to help you with a handicapped accessible van, or with modifying your house, or whatever you need. And I know that sounds so kind of gross, but like, it was done with such love and such of like, this is my brother, and how can I help? Everyone had something that they could give, and not everybody could give the same thing, but what a beautiful thing. And it's really helped me to know that when anybody is grieving anything, that you don't overthink it. You go with whatever you can offer. Can you offer money? Can you offer food? Can you offer advice? Can you offer, legal or medical advice? Can you offer, a listening ear? Can you just drop off flowers? I had a friend who lived out of state who would just periodically send flowers so that Chris could look at them. And then after he passed, just kept sending them, just so that it could, because she said, it always just feels nice to have something in the mail. And, everyone can do something from where they are. And if you compare it and say, well, I know I can't be there to hold your hand, but my college roommate, one of my dearest friends, would just send me cheese. Cause she's and Diet Coke. She's like, I just know in those dark moments, I want you to have a little bit of comfort and eat a little cheese and have a little Diet Coke and know that people love you. And look, like, it makes me cry. Like, everyone's little offering when you're going, like, it gets you through those times where you're like, I'm all alone and this is the worst and I'll never be happy again. And which is a very, very real, like, feeling.
Yeah.
And so I think that, that advice then is to not compare your offering to anyone else's, but just think, do one thing, don't overthink it.
Right. And think about doing yard work.
Yeah, seriously. No, but one of my, that's so funny. I cried one time because after the funeral, a couple of days after the funeral, and one of his brothers came and started mowing the lawns and had his boys come over and like clean out, because that was important to my late husband. And it's important to those Clark boys, like their lawn, and they were doing it. And it just caused me to cry and cry. Cause it was like, I can't mow. Like, what am I supposed to do now? And it was like, oh, they are giving me that gift. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
Yard work. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
Put that at actually the top of the list.
I know that would be on the top of my list too. That and cooking.
Yeah. A good homemade cookie. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Gosh, I think we could keep talking about this all day. We have so many stories we could probably compare about caregiving and all these things. My husband was only sick for 8 months, but it was plenty long time. So and it's interesting because that first year I found myself saying, this time last year, this was happening. This time last year, we were going to the ER every other day. Right? This time last year, he had this surgery. And so that first year, because there were so many direct comparisons.
Oh, I'm sure.
Was hard. Whereas for me, the second year, it lost a little bit of somehow magically, I don't know, it lost its power to say, well, this time 2 years ago, this was happening.
Yeah, it feels different, doesn't it? It feels like a little bit of a shift. I mean, our phones and social apps will, on this day, this year, and I'm always like, who thought this was a good idea? I guess people who live charmed lives thought that this algorithm would be,
Yeah, I actually went on Facebook and I suppressed all the memories between May of 2015 and January of 2016.
Oh, what a great idea. What a great
idea. And so nothing pops up from those days. And I'm just
I suppressed my memories on Facebook. I love that. That's so funny. What a modern dilemma.
Oh boy. Yeah, I know. And there probably were a few good things that maybe I would like to have pop up from that period, but it is so not worth it.
Yeah. Too big of a price to pay.
I know. Exactly.
Look those pictures up on in your Google Photos or whatever.
Exactly. Find them on my phone or something. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh boy. Well, gosh, I do think we should wrap up here though. One thing that I always like to ask widowed parents that I speak to is if you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to them?
I'm going to cheat and say two. First, I'm going to say I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I am. When I just think of all the people who, when you have your darkest moment and you think, oh, this happens to other people too. There is that, like, I am so sorry. And the second thing I will say is that I would say to trust that there is hope, that you won't always feel like this all the time, even though you don't think that's true. You don't know how that could be possible. When I didn't have any hope in that little while, I trusted people who I loved and trusted when they said that it would get better, and they were right. And so I hope is a very powerful motivator for life. I think without hope, you can't live. And so I don't want to underestimate that. So I would just add to that of like, when you feel better, it's not an indication that your love is less. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite. And I think that how much you love them and how deep the pain and the loss of that, I think that I know it can propel hope, that love and hope sort of spring from the same place. And it doesn't feel like it right now, but that's true. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think that's a beautiful place actually to end.
Thank you.
So my guest today is Lisa Valentine Clark, widowed parent and host of The Lisa Show on BYU Radio. So Lisa, where can listeners find you and find your podcast if they'd like to learn more about your work?
Yeah, you bet. Anywhere that you download your podcast. So if, Spotify or Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, all that, you can download The Lisa Show. Yeah. And
awesome.
We bring people together and talk about real things that can help you live a good life. So we have a lot of fun too.
Terrific. Well, I will put a link to that in the show notes. And thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Lisa Valentine Clark as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 118. If you're finding the Widowed Parent Podcast helpful, please consider supporting the show. It's easy. You can just go to buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. As always, thank you for listening. And until next week, remember, you've got this.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.